Hi, welcome back to my video series. This is part 2 of data structures and models. It's aimed at data analysts that are embarking on a data analysis pathway where they're responsible for source and target data, working in between those in order to prep the data either for their reporting or for somebody else's reporting. And so let's talk about designing your data target. One of those strange old adages is that if you don't know where you're going, how do you know when you get there? Sometimes applies to the data analyst journey as well. Someone's giving you a bunch of data and says, hey, generate a report out of this, and so you begin to work on it, manipulate it, and analyze it, etc., until you finally say, hey, here's a really neat report. But is that really where you wanted to go? So let's talk a little bit about designing where you're going, which is planning your trip, so to speak. Hopefully, when you get into the second step, you will have a set of standards that you'll read from to get to, but you need to take a look at what it is that you want to have as a result. And there's a number of things to deal with as far as the structures and the design and in making sure that you can properly solve your problem and hopefully turn it over to somebody else to maintain going forward. What we're going to talk about briefly in this presentation are four things. One, we'll talk about target data structures, how you can structure your data result, how to design that structure or data store that you're moving your data into. Hate to do it, but we have to talk about testing. I once asked one of my analysts that was just learning to use Alteryx and was really excited to begin using some of the tools and to be able to manipulate her data. And I said, I have one question for you. I said, how are you going to know that this data is accurate when you're done doing all this work and building a report? And she looked at me puzzled. And I said, well, if there's a development team, the development team has QA analysts that will assure that the answers that are a result of the development process are true and accurate and can be relied upon. Since you are dealing with the input, you're dealing with the translation, and you're dealing with the output, you're also having to deal with the testing. So we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that if that isn't enough to scare you away already. And finally, we'll talk about metadata artifacts. What should you leave behind when you're done with this? Developers hate doing documentation, but they know it's required. Data architects love documentation because it's what we do for a living, you might say. We draw pretty pictures, make pretty structures, and document everything that we've done and put together. Architects are funny that way. They like paper and documentation, things they can leave behind, hand over to somebody else, so everybody's on the same page. What should you do as an analyst, even though you're the one that's generating this, working on this? 6 months from now, when someone says, hey, remember what you did 6 months ago? Can you make a little change to that? And you may be scratching your head going, I don't remember what I did because you didn't document your own work. We'll talk about that too. So very simple, let's talk about choosing your target data structure. You have lots of things to choose from. You can put it in a spreadsheet, you can put it in a relational database, you can pack it up into XML, make a PDF, put it back into a flat file, choose a favorite NoSQL structure if you're looking into doing that and you're doing something with a data lake or some other non-structured data source. But simply put, the easier question to ask is, what is the requirement for this data that you're working on? If somebody simply says, I need a report, well, now it comes up to you as to what's the best way to get this data into a reporting tool and in a reporting structure. And it also the question is, what do you have available to you? I always like to put things into a relational database, but a lot of times you don't have access to a relational database, so you have to find something else to put it into. And that's where things like spreadsheets or flat files come from. And it's something to help you decide how to go about choosing your data structure as a result is, let's look at the data's life cycle. What are you dealing with right here? And a lot of people say, well, I don't have time to do anything really fancy. I just have to get this report out by tomorrow. Well, this is the immediacy, so don't over design something, over analyze something, over document something that you need to get done right away. And I understand that completely. So there's some little things you can do to satisfy best practices and have just the basic amount of documentation or metadata sitting behind it, because after all, you are going to build this workflow. Are you going to manipulate and translate this data? What are you going to do? So take some time and think about that. And even though it's an immediate need, you can do something much lighter and much simpler. So look at how immediate do you need this? What about refreshing it? Even if it is an immediate need, is it good for today? What about tomorrow? You're going to have to run this all over again tomorrow? Or is it weekly, monthly, quarterly, or not at all? So you look at what your refresh frequency is when you're trying to determine how to store your target data and what kind of structures to use in your target data store. Good idea to look at how much data you have that you'll be bringing out of the source, as well as what you'll be saving in your target. If you have a huge amount of data, you may not want to put it into a text file or try to figure it out, put it into an XML file, because that's a bit larger. So you need something that can handle a large amount of data if you have that. I've always said that very small sets of data, you really can't go wrong with what you choose to do, because small sets of data, medium sets of data still remain efficient. Wonder or question, how are you going to maintain this data going forward? Are you going to turn it over to somebody else? Are you going to do a full refresh every time? Should you think about doing incrementals? So the maintenance going forward is also something that you'll want to think about as you go into this. And all these things put together are what you need to look at to determine how it is that you want to store the target information when you're finished with it. And I always talk about, well, let's design this. How do you design it? Well, being a data architect, I like data models mainly because they're pictures. But your data model could be something very sophisticated at the very beginning. If I'm going to build some kind of data mart that is going to have an enduring relationship with the business, I might want to go out and do a design of a full data mart with dimension tables and fact tables, and that's good if you need to do that and you understand how to do that. I also will go ahead and drop in the don't forget about category. SQL DBM is an online data modeling tool that is free if you don't mind ads. If you don't want ads, you can pay a nominal fee and have ads removed, but it does all the basics for data modeling and is a good way to get started with data modeling. And we may have a session on that here in the near future. If you don't have something very large or enduring that you try and design, someone says, all I want is to generate this report. Well, even if I'm going to be doing a flat file as my output, something that's tab delimited, it's a good idea to understand what it is that you are going to be putting into that flat file. And again, a simple data model of a single table that is denormalized. It just simply has in it the attributes that you'll be putting into your flat file, as long as they're data types, helps you visually see what it is that you're developing along the way and using the tool of your choice to do so. If you don't like something as sophisticated as a data modeling tool, I myself find it very easy to do. Some people find it very confusing. You can just go ahead and create a spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, give the name of the table, primary key, just so you know what that means and how that works. In other words, what is the identifying column, and then the columns and the data types, etc. Just putting this into a spreadsheet gives you something to refer back to as you're doing the development work, and that you can update along the way to then end up with some metadata when you're done. And again, there is nothing wrong with a spreadsheet design, because it leaves something sitting behind and something that you can have on one screen while you're developing on the other screen. You also can simply use some small database tool. If you have a database itself, you can create a table and look at the list of that table. I have created this little table inside of my Access database, and you can actually do data modeling in Access, and I will drag this over just to let you see. So I simply created a table, and I went ahead and created a query that I dropped that table into, so then I could see a picture of that table. So created that table going through the table details. So here I can see what it is that I've created, edit that, take a look at it in a picture view so I can see what's going on. And Access also has, as we've seen before in database tools, you have the database documenter that will go ahead and give you some English surrounding your table definition as well. If you want to get something more sophisticated, you can go ahead and create a data model for multiple tables, and you can do that through a query. And here I have a query in the designer view. And there you can see I have my tables that are in my data mart, and I've drawn relationships between them. So now I have a pictorial representation of what it is that I'm working on and trying to create as my target. So this is just basically a lightweight data modeling tool as well that you can have access. Most everybody has free access to access. That's using two words in there at the same time meaning different things. So let's talk about testing just for a bit. Testing, I think, falls into these questions: who, what, when, and how. Think about those as you're going in. The who is, who's going to be testing us? Is it just you? Are you responsible for finding the data, designing the data, developing the workflow, testing it, make sure it works, then generating the graphs or other metrics coming out the other side and putting it on a website so that people can use it? Or is there someone else out there who's going to go ahead and help you? If you're doing this for someone, it's always nice to ask them is, hey, how about testing what I've got so you can have confidence in my answers that I've generated as well. So the who can be you, who can be other people. You might have a team that can help you with it. Asking the question what, and this is, what is it that you're going to test? Are you going to use source data that's coming in from the system so you can verify it? Or are you going to be creating your own test data? I always like to create my own little set of test data. Alteryx is a good tool for doing that because it has a great random number generator, but all your development tools can create data randomly so that you have an idea of testing your edge conditions, your out of range conditions, what it is that you need to test so you can generate test data. Or you can bring in the whole test data from your source system. I myself also do not like testing, 100,000 records, so I will pull out a key set or a random sampling of that set of data so that I would test a lot less records that I can now visually see whether or not the answer is what I need it to be. When are you going to test this? Well, if you're handing it over to somebody, that's great. And you can ask them, well, would you like to test it along the way? I truly believe in incremental testing, even if it's just me or if it's someone else that's helped me out, saying, hey, look, this is my first cut through the data. What do you think about it? What's it look like? How do you like it? Does it do what you want it to do? And then you build some more of the data, get more sophisticated with your data builds, etc. So the question is, when are you going to test it? Along the way, at the end, when you're completely done and have that picture, all of those are valid answers, but it's just something you have to ask. And then finally, how are you going to test this? How I actually break it into two sub-questions. One is, how long do you have to test it? So that sort of determines to a degree if you're doing this in 3 days or 2 days and you pretty much have 1 hour to test it when you're done. So you might test it slightly differently because the how long is very short. Or maybe you have a nice long testing cycle and so you can spend more time and you can do some more design. So the other part of how is, how are you going to do this testing? What tools do you have? What methodologies do you have? Do you have any analytic tools that can do the verification of your results as well? Do you have a base set of data you can compare it against? So again, how are you going to test it? So now you've actually done most of the work, and we talk about what you want to leave behind, which is your metadata artifacts. Some of the simple things you can do is just simply a data dictionary. If you remember early on, we talked about having a spreadsheet that had our table information in it from a design standpoint. So now we can simply add a description onto the end and verify that it's there. We get a really simple little data dictionary that has in it the name of the table, the columns, the data types, lengths, any kind of note such as can't be null, 0 is an invalid value, any note that you want to put into that, and then a description of what it is. Always like to, when I am actually doing something like this, I like to go back to the business, because even though being an architect, I have much of a business savvy and business thought too. When it comes to descriptions, I'm not the best one to describe some of this data. So going to your business source and say, hey, help me define what you want to call these pieces of information that I'm putting into this target table, you get something that's a bit better than breed name being the name of the breed. Although in this case, that's probably enough. So one of the artifacts to look at doing is to go ahead and create that data dictionary. Other thing that I like to use, especially for something that's complex, is generate a mapping document. If you're doing an ETL development team, something that's in with the side of the data warehouse, they probably have a standard mapping document that they use. I used to laugh because one of the first things I did when I built a really large data warehouse with a pretty good sized team is that we designed a data mapping document, and then we designed an ETL process to pull the information out of that mapping document and populate tables so that we could do reporting. So this doesn't become hidden data. This actually can go into your data warehouse as well. But you can do with, again, this is just simplistic version of what I've used in the past, which is identify the source, the type of source it is. In this case, this is the name of the table. It is a delimited text. The target table that we're going to, it's in a database. Along the way, I also have to, as part of the development of this data set, I have to use the supporting reference tables. It's a good idea to document anything that you're using from a reference or a cross correction. If you're looking up data in one, in order to correct it, put it out as another. Any of those reference data, cross-reference data, mapping tables, etc., that you might want to use, document them in here. In Alteryx, you can create text files to do this with as well. And so it's good to document those, and I'll show you that here in just a moment. So a mapping document typically says, here's my source. This is the position in the table that's coming on. This is the position in the text file that it's in. This is the field name. This is the data type that I associate with it. And then here is a transformation. And then the target it's going to and other information about that target. So for example, in this, we are bringing in the puppy ID on our feed. So that is our source field. What we need to do is look up the puppy ID in the puppy table, and then I will get out of it puppy name, kennel name, birth date, and breed name. And a little information that if it's not found, I need to reject that record. So again, whatever you want to put into this mapping document is something that you can use. One thing to look at is to go into your organization and see what kind of standards might be around. If you have a very robust data architecture team, they probably have some of these standards already floating around. You might want to go ahead and get a hold of those just to take a look at what's going on, so that it makes it easier for you, so you don't have to start from nothing and create your own set of documents for metadata. So it's always good to look what's out there, and then you can always reduce it down, since you're not necessarily going to have to satisfy the standards of your data architecture team, but you just need to satisfy yourself. So I always say, don't forget about what else is out there that you can borrow, so you don't have to generate it from scratch. And then finally, the big pushback on all this is that no matter what your development tool is, whether it be something like C++, Informatica, and we can go on and on with all the other tools that you could possibly using, just like your input source, this is your output target. They all can write different data sources. They can all help you generate your metadata, and they can all assist with your testing, so that you don't have to do everything from scratch and for yourself. So look into your tools, see what they can do and they can generate, and how they can help you when you generate your target, as well as how to help you design and document the target once you've done. So that's my big best practices look at when you get ready to create data, what you need to think about when you're getting into that target for your data manipulations, data blending, data corrections, etc. So I hope that this will help you as you try to figure out the beginning and then this is being the end of your workflows, what you need to be concerned about so that your life after that development task is a whole lot easier and is better for your organization. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, drop me any comments, and stay tuned. I think we'll be going a little bit more after this into some data modeling lessons. Have a great day.